All right, now we're going to start part two of this. So we're going to go into a little bit of, I want to say politics, but it's only indirectly politics because it's social, cultural issues. And then we'll talk some fitness at the end. But I wanted to, let me get it queued up so I can show you the picture. But it's kind of the news of the day-ish.
Yeah.
And we're not jumping on any bandwagons to do this because this is kind of integral, because one of the main themes that we started with is what's activism versus what's actually happening. And come on. Okay, so I want to bring this up here. And yes, it's a meme, and yes, it's supposed to be abrasive in its own way. But we have, there we go. We have this man that calls himself a woman that just won the national title in swimming. And you're seeing a lot of reaction on the right, especially about this. But realistically, I think true feminists should be fighting at the same level. But this picture says it all. So you get this quote unquote female. I'm saying quote unquote because female means sex, not gender, right? And
that's what we were told, and yet the lines keep blurring. When the trans issue first started to become a popular talking point, we were told, well, sex and gender aren't the same thing. Okay, well, you said
and
that
they're not, but at the same time,
blurring.
Yeah, this is where the people on the side that fought for something need to stand up. So Title IX is being hijacked to include this instead of, equal exposure for women or scholarship opportunities for women to go to school based on this. So this one all the way on the right, if you can see my cursor, she's technically fourth place. When realistically, that's 1 through 3 in females, by definition, females raising. He still has a penis. He still has a cock and balls. Okay. Franken beans, right? So he's still got all of that. He's just on hormone suppression. And it doesn't matter if you went through puberty. Look how tall he is. If he had been on hormone suppression in puberty, he would not be that tall. Along with other,
look at his height, look at his shoulders, look at his hips. All of those things are masculine compared to the other 3 over there. And to your point, so those 3 in that picture, that should have been 1, 2, 3. That should have been gold, silver, bronze.
Well, and also number 17 out of 16 doesn't get to compete at the next competition. So you've got someone who lost everything, not just the medal.
Yeah, lost even the chance.
Even the chance.
Yeah. And I like that picture because it shows what's really going on multiple levels.
I like it and I hate it. And I'm going to get into that.
Yeah, yes. Okay. These girls know that this is first, second, third place.
Which is why
which is why they're taking that picture together. But they won't say it. Everyone's afraid to say it. Every article I've read or heard about or skimmed on this swimming national championship, everyone was afraid to say, this is absurd, this is wrong. Where are the feminists standing behind these girls so that they can speak up for themselves and say, this is absurd, this is wrong, this is damaging to women? Where are the fathers standing behind their daughters there saying, this is ridiculous?
Okay, so that's the conservative talking point, and that's where everybody's going. This is where I want to take us down a different path, because I have studied the activism, right? And this is a Kaepernick moment. The point of this whole situation is the outrage. This poor dysmorphic person that should be getting some sort of psychiatric treatment and help along the way. And if he truly does identify as this one thing, there's a process for that and some guidance that doesn't involve hurting women. This poor dysmorphic person, although I think just looking at everything is probably pretty narcissistic as well, is a prop to prove a point, right? So what did we have with Kaepernick? We had the premise, America is racist. Do something that inflames Americans, and then attach the cause to it so that the reaction to it is proof of the racism. So now we have the premise. This is the trans version of Colin Kaepernick. Now we have America is transphobic and unaccepting of trans people in general, which that's true. There are some people out there that are going to be completely bigoted. Most of the nation is going to be completely indifferent. And then there's some that would be completely empathetic and emotional about it. So there is that spectrum there. But okay, so the premise, America is anti-trans. So what can we do to inflame America? Let's put this dude in athletic competition and hurt these women in the process, so that when we react to it in the way you just said, America's anti-trans.
It's why the arguments don't make any sense, because they're not trying to make a philosophical, rational point. It's why if you look at the early 1900s in the West and in the US and in Europe, there was a rash of anarchy terrorism. Okay. They were anarchists, but they were communists. That doesn't make any sense. The two are radically diametrically opposed. Well,
just like our Antifa.
Exactly. That's because anarchy wasn't really the point. The point was to destabilize and upset the system so you could pull down the system and put communism in its place. That's why the arguments of the anarchist communists didn't make any sense, because that wasn't really the point, right?
Well, and that brings part two of what I was saying. So we have to understand that this is actually an activist ploy to get the reaction they want. The reaction they want is out of the American public. Where this could have been derailed is already passed. And that's why the picture makes me happy and sad at the same time. Because those athletes, those actual female athletes, should have all stayed in the locker room and refused to swim. It has to be a grassroots movement. We cannot rely on our leaders, because our leaders have too many benefits from the argument itself.
Yes.
From the parents coming out, from the fans coming out, from the just random soccer mom that read their Facebook feed and sees this boy in front of these girls, right? So they need the public reaction as the catalyst, when the reaction should have been, we are female athletes and you're denying us what we should have as females. Because female athletics is, and I did hear this somewhere else, I'm trying not to steal it because it was a thought originally of mine, but they did say it well with Heather Heying. But female athletics in and of itself is not inclusive, because it is to exclude males so females can compete with other females. It is by design not inclusive, and it's for a good reason. Because in certain sports, men are going to dominate no matter what, swimming being one of them. You want to go female gymnastics? No man has a chance. Very few men would have a chance, because being more feminine actually helps you there.
With the way that is judged and graded and structured. Yeah, a man could not do almost all the things that they do there.
Which is why if you look at gymnastics, male gymnasts have a different protocol than female gymnastics. You don't see they
don't do all the same events. Yeah,
you don't see the beam. You see parallel bars with the boys, where uneven bars with the females. They even distinguish between the genders, between what they compete in. So you're not going to have a female dominate the rings, where you're never going to have a male dominate the floor routine, or the parallel bar, or the beam. Now they both do the vault. So in that individual event, you might see some difference there. But Uh, in most sports, being bigger, faster, stronger matters, and swimming being one of them. Uh, imagine Aaron Judge saying, "I'm a woman, I'm going to play softball." He would be hitting every girl out of the park almost every time. And it
Well, to your point, again, the whole point of this is that there are differences. There are genetic differences which lead to physical differences in physical performance. And I didn't know we were going to go down this road, so this is off the top of my head. But
well, that's why I was trying to bring a different. I knew you would react in the kind of
yes,
typical reactionary conservative way on this. So,
but the number I heard recently, and I think this was on Whitlock's show, this was several weeks back, that I believe Jackie Joyner Kersey still holds the record for the 100-meter dash. Since she set that record in female competition, something like 1,700 men have run faster than that in international competition. So she is the fastest by far and has held that record for a long time. And yet 1,700 men, not 1,700 times, but 1,700 different men have run faster than that in the 100-meter in international competition.
Again, another illustration of how not everybody likes to use the word equity. This is not equitable.
No,
it is not. Because realistically, even if we go down the road of trans inclusion, what you create is a master class of trans female athletes instead of just women's sports.
Which is why you're right, but I don't know how else to argue, because you're right in that for the activists, trans inclusion isn't even the point. The outrage is the point. But at the same time,
which is where the athletes had to be the one to make the
yes.
stand. The public itself is just an irate vocal stand, whereas the athletes could have basically gone on strike.
You know, I think you answered my question before I even finished asking my question, which was, how do you argue this when for the activists it's not even the point? And I think your point is on point, which is, rather than being, for those of us who are rightly outraged at this, rather than being your own activist, what you need to do is be a support character, stand behind the ones who really need to be making the point, which is those women who are being directly
the actual victims.
Yes, the actual victims.
Yep. It's like going out in the street and screaming about, the patriarchy right next to the guy who's, laying cement on the side of the road for pennies on the dollar. We have to actually support the people who are being victimized by this, not just being loud and abrasive about the person who is the catalyst of it all. So again, it might be the mistake we've made with Kat before too, although it's a little bit different because I'm 100% sure he knows exactly what he's doing. Okay, 99.9% sure. Nothing's 100%. But this other character, he seems to be caught in the moment. We talk about useful idiots. He's a useful prop, is what he's been. And the outrage over this, the division over it, is what allows it to continue. And it sucks for these female athletes because their choice is either to compete against this person who they can't possibly beat. Wasn't he like a full length ahead of the next person?
Yeah.
Or to give up everything for this year to boycott it. And that's a sucky ass choice. Whereas that's where, instead of outrage, like you said it better than I was going to say it, be supportive of these athletes, because they're the ones on the ground that need to be making this stand. Because if they do, and female athletics gets poised on the brink of collapse because these females refuse to compete against males, then the system will change. We
Yeah.
cannot rely on the admins on the top, the government officials on the top to do it, because they won't. It's
No.
just like voter ID laws, right? The majority of the country support it.
Overwhelming majority.
Overwhelming majority.
You would be hard pressed to find an issue that is more that cuts across party and demographic lines more fully than voter ID.
And the same thing with trans female athletes competing against women. The majority, I think it would be even more than the voter ID laws.
And yet, like I said,
support it.
Every article I read about this national swimming championship, the other competitors were afraid to say anything critical about it. Anything even kind of critical was always
which is why I said they would lose their year.
Yeah.
They would lose this competitive year, or however long it takes for this to resolve. And I don't think it would take more than a year. If every female athlete says, I'm not even going to go out there, I think it would have taken that one tournament, that one meet, I guess, in swimming. So it happened in the past, and a client of mine brought this up. Dr. Renee something, tennis trans athlete. Hold on, it might still be in my search.
That rings a bell. I was gonna say
she went on to coach Maria Navratilova later, but okay. So either way, she was a male to female tennis competitor, and what happened was the competitive bodies were sanctioning it, but the female tennis players were refusing to go to these tournaments, and eventually it ended.
What is it? Who was the male to female dude who was fighting MMA? I don't think
Fox. I was about to bring.
I don't understand how that wasn't
an outrage, because he was breaking faces,
literally breaking faces, and the orbital bone is what, like the second strongest bone in the body, and really freaking dangerous if you break it.
Which, from a competitive standpoint, I almost understand what these women were thinking, stepping in the ring with the trans her, but at the same time, this could have been stopped a long time ago, because you could have just had every athlete slated to fight the Fallon Fox to say no. If they just said no from the beginning, it would have ended. It might have stopped this whole trans female athletics thing from the beginning, realistically. But they kept stepping in the ring with her and getting their faces busted in.
The other thing that I think could break this, if you don't get, hopefully what you get is, instead of outrage, you get support, so that the actual victims can stand up and stand together and say, no, we're not going to participate in this. The other thing that could break it is if you had a large movement of trolls who said, okay, I'm a chick, and go break the WNBA.
Would it though? Or would they call it normalizing it?
Some point it would have to become a farce. If you had,
you're talking about so overwhelming that it's cartoon, basically.
If you had, the roster of
guys coming out in tights, so their 9-inch penis shows while they're.
I think the roster for an NBA WNBA team is like 15, and if you have 8 to 10 of those being women, being trans women, being men who say I'm a woman now, and they're on hormone replacement, but they haven't bothered to do any of the other things that go along with that, and they say, yep, I'm going to compete now, and they're just dominating, I think that would break it.
I prefer what I said, because it's the less abrasive version.
Because it's the way it should happen.
The troll version actually plays into the activism in the sense that it's like, see, they are transphobic. Whereas the other way, it would actually force the American public to say, well, we do support women's rights, we do, we have sympathy in our hearts for the trans movement, but yeah, it isn't one to one. And it would kind of force that conversation versus
Mhm.
this outrage that automatically turns off a whole section of the population to be like, well, I am a good person, so I'm not going to be mean about it.
Yeah.
And so it's not, it's being, you're actually being forced to support one thing or another versus uh attacking that other thing. There's a big difference between those two. It sounds like semantics, but there is a huge difference.
There is a huge difference, and it's one of the, again, it's why the activism makes no sense, because that's not their point. We hear constantly about how we have a mental health crisis, and we have to be open, and we have to talk about mental health. And yet, if you talk about the mental health crisis of the trans movement, if you talk about what that really means in mental health terms, you're called transphobic, you're called a bigot. You can be confrontational, you can be contrary, and it is not inherently mean. That was the term that you said that I think really kind of shows why it's so hard for people to talk about these things publicly, is because if you say, look, I disagree with this thing because reason, you're being mean. You
All
are
right,
not inherently being mean just by saying no.
yeah, and here's hidden point number 3 that ties into our last episode. Normalization, grooming. This is not about our generation. This is being used by our generation because nobody's willing to speak up about it in a reasonable way, because the next generation of human beings in the United States are going to have been exposed to man competing against women because he called himself a woman. That generation is going to think it's normal. And that's the point. It's the next generation. It's not me and you. You and I are the catalyst to it, how we respond to it. We're the tools along with the people being in the competition. It's about the next generation, because we're going to have a generation of kids that went up, and when you something like say the troll movement happens, well, this whole generation of people is going to be like, well, yeah, but there's that dude that was swimming back then, there was Fallon Fox that was fighting in MMA that back then, that isn't this the way it's supposed to be? And that troll movement won't work because you have a whole generation of people saying, well, that's normal. That I remember that actually happened in the real world. That happened in my lifetime. And that's where the slippery slope concept creep kind of plays through. It's not about you and me. You and me are tools if we respond in the right way.
Yeah.
So right way by their design, not right way in
Right.
what we're just talking about. So there's point number 3. I wanted to keep this brief because I don't want anything to get lost in the mud, but
Yeah.
those are my big 3 points that I think are in addition to the current conversation.
Mm. I think that's a good place to end it, because we could get into some of the more technical details of, as I was saying, why this doesn't make sense. But the first thing to remember is that it's not supposed to make sense, because that's not the point.
It's
The
the
point,
activism.
the point is activism, outrage, and the destruction of current systems to replace them with something else.
Yep. Just same as the Kaepernick thing. It never was about the flag. The flag was a tool to piss off people.
Yep.
And this unfortunate, mentally disturbed person is a tool.
I do have another thought that I will say that I think goes along with what you're saying, which is the reason I brought up the troll example of how that could maybe work to break things, is because something that goes along with your point is allyship. This idea that politics is like a cable package, that you have to, and why political philosophy being pulled into practical politics is so bad, because it means that if you are a feminist, well, you have to go along with this the trans part of it, even though some aren't, even though some have been speaking up about it
Oh,
for a lot of
you don't want to be a turf now.
for a lot of people, for a lot of people. I mean, that's the reason it's LGBTQAI plus, because all of this stuff has to be a package deal. And even if you think, well, I don't know about that, but no, anyone who disagrees with it is a bigot and a bad person, and I don't want to be part of that, and I want these people to help me with the things I want, so I guess I'm going to go along with it. No, we should be able to talk about these things individually and rationally. You don't have to agree with everything that your side says is the way things should be. Have some free thinking and be able to talk issue to issue.
Which is really the biggest downfall to the two-party system. Now, that's a different discussion, but we see what happened in Canada and places like that, and how even more than two-party system can be problematic as well. But it's I heard the quote once that the only thing worse than a two-party system is a one-party system. But I don't know. It's really difficult because, again, I bring up Canada because Trudeau got reelected with what, about 30% of the vote, and we see where that goes. You can't get him out because there's so many conflicting voices.
It's about what the Nazi Party get. I'm sorry, that was
Yeah,
random, completely unrelated point.
And somehow they still have the same system, but that's neither here nor there. But the big problem with the two-party system is you are being forced into this box, and when the boxes start contradicting themselves, you get stuck in that contradiction. And the term is politically homeless, which is where I'm at. But at the same time, it would be nice if a party, because I have to choose between two at some point, would decide on the rational route on most everything. And that's where we keep getting stuck. We get too progressive, and then we vote somebody in who gets too regressive, and then we get too progressive and then too regressive, and we just go through this pattern all the way through. But I think we're going off the
Well, did you want to talk fitness stuff, or do you want
yeah, we can be quick because we're just talking variety, right?
Right. So yeah, what we kind of teased last time is because we were talking programming, and one of the buzzwords that annoys me is muscle confusion. And look, all you're talking about there is variety, and variety can be a good thing, but if you're constantly spazzing out, bouncing all over the place, I think where the muscle confusion idea came from, and maybe more specifically, but I always assumed that where that came from was neurological adaptation, that you see rapid results if you're doing something new, because the first thing that's going to happen there is not muscle growth per se, it's the neurological adaptation. So you're going to feel like oh man, I'm making a ton of progress here. And it's, well, yeah, kind of, but not the progress you think.
Okay, so if this is adaptation over time. You got my whiteboard there?
Yep.
Okay, so with any stimulus, what you get is something that looks like this. Okay, so this is where that muscle confusion crowd kind of comes in, because they see this, so they think they can get something like that as we go. But that's very short-sighted. So
right.
Can I erase clear?
What they want to do is they want that the first part of that curve, the steep part, to keep going and not have it ever kind of slow down and flatten out.
So they think they can get that is the better representation. If we keep confusing your muscles, you'll keep doing that. But that's not the case. What you end up with is something like, whoops. Oh, because I kept the eraser on. Hold on.
And there is an element of logic to it, in that this is why we have interval training. This is why we have interval training as opposed to steady state cardio.
Yeah. So what you do with the muscle confusion model is you get something like this. Whereas as we showed in our periodization last time, we kind of want something
Yeah.
along this line.
You want that trend line. Yeah, there's going to be some peaks and valleys, but you want that trend line to keep going up.
Now, where we want, let's see, stop share. Where we want to be when we're talking variety. So too much variety ends up with that bottom little pattern that I saw, where everything is random. The original CrossFit model, life is random, so should your training be. And again, you get that initial spike in result,
right?
But then after that, you really don't. And I was at a conference where Greg Glassman spoke, and he used that general adaptation model, which is Matveyev, actually, not Glassman, but he used that to explain CrossFit and talking about exactly what we're talking about, where the randomness actually plays into it. No, it plays into it in the short term. But when we're talking variety, what I use variety for is to add volume, because we want consistency in training, which is the non-variety, which is the not random. So say my goal is pure strength. We'll go with 5-3-1 Jim Wendler model. Okay. I need to train squat, deadlift, bench, and consistently have a linear periodization model going up, which is the 5-3-1 program. If you want to get as strong as possible, there you go. There's the best program out there. But there's a thing called over patterning. And this is where those guys get it a little bit off when it comes to general health. So if I want to have volume in my training protocol, which is again sets times reps times weight, I can't over pattern my client or they're going to have an overuse injury. So if I go through the same movement too many times, eventually something's going to break. A good example is rotator cuffs with a pitcher. We have a pitch count for a reason, right? Because if you throw so many pitches, eventually it's going to hurt your shoulder. The same thing with exercise. If I walk too many stairs, eventually I'm going to have a knee problem. So what I use variety for is I can hit the same muscle groups, the same bone structures, the same joint structures from a slightly different angle with a slightly different movement and probably a slightly different tempo, and not end up with an over patterning injury when I add volume to their program. Because I want also in my athlete or fitness client to be able to do as much work possible, because that's being a useful person, being a useful individual. And most of the time body comp, let's face it, body comp and appearance is the number one goal for most of us. And
we all want to look better naked.
That's and the more you can do goal. The more you can do, the more you can eat, right? And
that too.
And food is readily available. So
that's my fitness goal.
If I can maximize how much work you can do without hurting you, look at hurting you as a setback in that initial goal of looking better, right? I gained a little fat after this because eventually there's only so much you can do when you can't do a whole lot, right?
Yeah. So let me give an example, like a specific example of putting variety into a program. So I'm doing a push-pull legs split, and the first leg day is going to be more posterior chain focused stuff. The second leg day is going to be more anterior focused leg stuff. So yesterday it was quads. It was quad focused. So for me, that means my primary exercise, my first exercise is going to be, if my neck is feeling okay, front squats. It hasn't been, so leg press. All right. Well, I want some more volume, but I don't want to do another leg press or even another squat. I need to change it up so that I engage. I'm thinking the best way to explain this technically yet in layman's. I want to engage the muscles differently so that, to your point, it's not that same pattern. Okay, so I did heavy leg presses to begin with. So now I'm going to do something different that's going to get some extra work on those quads, but it's not going to overwork them. I'm going to do some kind of lunge or a step up where I'm recruiting other muscles, so I'm not overtaxing that quad, right? And then I want to add, some more volume, but I also need, now that I've done, some single leg work, some different recruitment, I also know I need some lateral work, some movement, some angle to keep that overall leg health. So now I'm going to finish with something like, a side lunge to a crossover or something like that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how to kind of explain this, because I want to bring and for some reason my computer wants to update all my Microsoft
Of course it
Excel
does. So that
as we're
there's a,
talking, but it's actually, for me, it's more about the joints.
mhm,
So the soft tissue can take a lot more work than the joints can
mm,
actually do. All right. So let me see if this one's a good example. Share screen. So this is, oh, that's day 4. Let's go to day 1. Can you see my Excel sheet?
yeah.
Okay, so we've got a split here, and this is I should have brought a simpler one up. This is kind of a complex split, but oh no, this is a push-pull. This is a push-pull split. So I got squats as the main leg exercise, which is technically a pushing motion, right? And dips as the main upper body exercise. And then this is where you'll normally see the variety, because now I can do, so I've got the main thing I want to progress. 3x12. We talked about this last week, undulating. 4x12, 3 by higher rep, 4 by higher rep. So we're working up in reps. So at the end of the day, the goal is to actually be able to do what you could do here for an extra 2 reps. So we're working that muscular endurance. That's the goal of this phase. And it's all pressing exercises on this day, where day 2 are all what we call the hinge mobility or hinge work for the posterior, which would be a pull, quote unquote, and the same for the upper body. So where I have the variety is usually down in this area. So I will play with these because the main lifts are going to be the same as we go, and we're going to progress. But then I'll play with these because I can give you different angles. So a split squat gives you a different stimulus on the knee joint than the regular squat, also on the SI joint in the low back. So now I can play with a different variable by giving the joint a different look while I'm still working quads, which are the main pushing leg muscle.
Well, this is one of the core things you taught me, which was don't program muscles or muscle groups. Think in terms of movement. So that's what I was trying to figure out how to explain with my own example of it's not just, so the leg press is a type of movement. The step up is a different kind of movement, even though the primary mover, the primary muscle, is still the quad, but that's a different movement. That lateral squat, that monster walk, or whatever I'm adding in that kind of finisher, that's a different movement.
Yeah, and so when you're really looking at the programming, pick your poison on what you want to progress, right? So I stick with the big multi-joint movements. I'm a squat, deadlift, bench press when I can get back to it, and I love rowing exercises. So I usually pick one of those as my primary movement patterns, and then we're going to do a systematic improvement there. But then with the volume work at the end, and even in a 5-3-1, you see the volume work. They call it assistance exercises, right? Then you can kind of mix and match. You don't have to do the same thing every day, every week. You can kind of play with those. So maybe I'll do a shoulder press one week, which you saw in that program, a single arm shoulder press, or I'll do an upright row. We can't do upright rows every week, or we're going to have an impingement syndrome. But if I alternate between upright rows and single arm overhead press and maybe a lateral raise, I've got a completely different joint stimulus with the same muscle groups being worked. So I can do that and actually add volume without hurting myself or hurting somebody else. And again, my main indicator of fitness is the volume load. How much work did you do in that hour?
Yeah.
And
That's another good example of where variety can come in. It's not about confusion. It's about being able to maintain your workload by doing different movements. So, that's where, like you were showing that third grouping, that's kind of how I do too, where if I have a finisher, that's a lot more variable because it kind of depends on how I'm feeling. Like, maybe I was going to do, I don't know, curtsies, probably not for me, but let's say I had,
I don't know why you're obsessed with those.
because I like them. Let's say I had programmed in curtsies for someone else who doesn't have gimpy knees, but
For those out there, it's also called a crossover lunge.
yeah, but we had done sumos as our primary lift, and so that was a little too taxing. And so now I see that, all right, well, you got a sore booty. Let's not do that. Let's do something else where we can engage that joint without putting so much pressure on the muscle, because that movement pattern is going to deteriorate. So we're going to do something else instead of what was programmed.
Well, and you can do that inner set as well. So what I brought up here, this is an upper lower split. By the way, this is like $60 to $75 an hour for everybody that's watching. So you're welcome. Is I did it within a set, and it's one of my favorite tactics to use to add variety to get more volume. And it's called a functional drop set, where basically you start with the hardest exercise and you work down to the easier one. So this is a tri-set for triceps. Okay.
Holy triceps, Batman.
Holy triceps Batman is what we call it. And we got a dip, a pullover, and a skull crusher. So we've got chest and triceps, we've got lats and triceps, and then we got pure triceps. So we're working from big to small as we go down. And by the end, you can barely lift your arms, right?
Yes.
So you get that pump that Arnold always talks about, where it's equivalent to an orgasmic stimulus, right?
Yeah.
And we get all that in a row. And
right. When I do those, the bro in me gets mad that I can't finish that third set, but I actually know that that's okay. That's what we're going for.
But let's break it down a little bit. We've got chest and triceps. So we've got in a flexion of the shoulder with an extension of the elbow, right? So triceps are involved in the extension of the elbow, but not the flexion of the shoulder. Okay, so we've got shoulder joint extending, or excuse me, flexing while elbow is extending. Again, we're thinking of joints. Now we've got pullover. So if I'm laying on my back, I've got extension of the shoulder with no elbow movement. It should be a soft elbow, so relatively straight, just enough to not be locked out.
The movement is becoming less complex.
But at the same time, lats extend the shoulder, but so do triceps. So triceps are still working without extending the elbow, two joint muscle. So we're taking advantage of that. And then we've got a skull crusher, which the shoulder stays immobile as I'm pressing out and extending the elbow. So we're able to distribute the joint stress while still crushing the triceps 3 times in a row. And so by using that method, I can get 35 reps out, or excuse me, 40 reps out. Whereas if I just stuck with dips, if I'm challenging myself, I wouldn't get much more than the 10.
Yeah. And you see that a lot in the brotacular bicep sets that people like to do in a public gym. I'm just going to do a gazillion curls so that I can, have brotacular biceps. Okay, well, have fun with that. Let me know how it works out for you.
Yeah, and they forget the bicep flexes the shoulder as well, and they could be using that to their advantage.
So this leads me into the last point I had of why I wanted to talk about muscle confusion. And this is another way I see it done and done wrong in public gyms, which is, and I especially see this with women, which is doing really long circuits with a gazillion different exercises. So a lot of times what I'll see is you kind of start at one end of the machines and you just work your way down. It's like you just did one set of 6 different machines, 6 different exercises, and then you're going to go back to the beginning because you're trying to muscle confusion. You're not getting any work done though, right? Because this is back to your peaks and troughs here. You have waited so long to go back to that exercise that you're not stressing that muscle or muscle group.
Okay, and this is where muscle confusion became popular and also kind of its downfall. And actually with a planned program, how you can manipulate it.
Mhm.
So the general idea is that, okay, so most people want to get thin, right? They want to lose fat, possibly gain muscle, and if they're thinking that far ahead. But when you're not good at something, you're going to get the greatest results. We're going to go back to this, right? So this time is when you're most exposed to the results you're getting, but also you get motivation from that. And unfortunately, we have a dedication issue in this country instead of a motivation issue. People get motivated; they can stick for that first 4 weeks. But then when it becomes this at the top, then it becomes dedication, and you got to start getting intricate. You got to start being consistent. You got to start having a little knowledge on how to stimulate your training to build the next thing. But what I do is take advantage of this without confusing the muscles, because what we actually want is some sort of adaptation. And when we talk about, like I said, you're going to get the most result from what you're least good at. A marathon runner, in their first, they do an 18-week program. When you talk about calorie burn, which again is most people's goal in this country, because we are in a caloric excess all the time because it's so easy to get food. In the first week of your program as a marathon runner, you would do a 3-mile run, and all the way up until the last week, you're pretty much peaking at pretty close to the 26 miles. In fact, you'll do a taper after that, but leading up to that, you'll eventually run your 26 and some odd miles. Those first 3 miles, you're going to burn as many calories as you did in that 26-mile run later. That's muscle memory in a nutshell. And it's a horrible term because your body gets good at what you do often. And so what I do is in my program is I use that to the benefit of my client. So if I take a variable like strength, oh, I got to get better at writing this. Whoops, it's touch screen, even if I use my finger or the thing. Okay, so S equals strength and T equals time. All right. So you're going to do this at the beginning. If you have the base, right? If we've already done the base work to it, you're going to have that, and eventually you're going to plateau. But can I change colors on this? Yes, I can. Okay. I'm learning this as we go. Red is endurance. You're going to do something like this in that time, because strength and endurance play counter to each other, right? So strength is a function of how many muscle fibers can I fire at once. That's inefficient because every firing of those muscle fibers uses energy. So the endurance portion goes down. Now, what I will do is in my program is I will make somebody strong up into a point, and then we're going to go into a muscle endurance phase right there, because this is down here. What do you suck at? And then we'll work that up. And then when we get to a point, we'll start working towards getting stronger again. And so now when we're talking caloric benefit, let's see, what color do we want to make calories? Orange, because it's the only color I can see. Calories, we get this.
So you get a much steeper trend line.
Mm-hmm. So yeah. So if I take someone who I made really strong and I ask them to run a mile, their calorie count's going to go because every step they take in that jog, they're firing probably 70% more muscle fibers than they need to actually take a step.
Mhm.
So we can actually manipulate that system to get that overall result, which is I want to look good in a bathing
Right.
suit.
It's
Right.
again, it's not the buzzword, it's not confusion, it's manipulating adaptation.
Mm-hmm. And so when you think of it from a confusion standpoint, where you're constantly changing with no plan, you're going to get an initial result. And then you're going to plateau on that because you have no
So
consistency.
you're never going to get that trend line. You're
Mm-hmm.
always going to stay down here bouncing up and down.
Yeah. And when you do the trend line version of it, like I just showed, okay, so we just did muscular endurance, then we did muscle building, then we did strength, which is kind of my 3 tiers. And then we go back to endurance. Next time I get to strength, I'm stronger than when I was when I started.
Mm.
So again, those variables go like this, but if we were to put them all in a row, it makes a straight line that looks like a triple helix DNA strand, right, going up. But I'm stronger than I was. I may not be as strong as I was at the end of the last strength phase because I worked something counter to it, but I'm still stronger than I was when I started. And then by the time I get to the next strength phase, I may not be stronger than I was at the end of the previous one, but I'm stronger than I was when I started it. And so you keep having this slight improvement all the way up while you're able to work all the other variables at the same time. And each one of those have that slight improvement on the way up, which is great because if I've got better muscular endurance, well, maybe I can do 6 sets of 3 instead of 4 the next time I do strength. So I can get more volume in.
Mm.
Maybe I can recover between sets a little faster. So where I was taking a 2.5 minute break between a set of 3 and another set of 3, I can take a 2-minute break. So now I can do more in that hour. Or even I've gotten to an endurance state where I can do kind of a Nick Tomolino kind of scheme where you do completely unrelated things, but they're still going to be cardiovascularly demanding, where I do a set of squats really heavy and I don't take a 3-minute break before the next set of, or I don't take a 3-minute, I do take a 3-minute break before the next set of squats, but I do a set of bench in between. So I got 3 squats, minute and a half, 3 bench, minute and a half, back to squats. And so now I'm doubling up. I'm able to get more done in that time frame, which is what he started doing with his college athletes because they only got so much lifting time.
Right.
He said, well, I could spend 40 minutes of my workout resting, or I can mix it up this way, and we spend 20 minutes of our workout resting, and we get all of this other stuff done. But you can't do that if you're cardiovascularly unfit because you can't even have the energy to do those bench press after the squat because you're so tired, even though it's a completely unrelated muscle group. It's all about total body energy at that point. So you can work up those different variables. And again, doing it in a planned way versus just throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks. Which is, I mean, CrossFit works if you live through it, right? Because it's completely over patterning. It's completely too high intensity all the time. Women benefit from it more than men because women handle volume better than men. But I think that's relative to intensity because human tissue is human tissue. And if you take a female muscle fiber, back to our discussion earlier with trans athletes and stuff, if you take a female muscle fiber versus a male muscle fiber, they're exactly the same. It is a muscle fiber, human muscle fiber, but the number and the way the nervous system interacts with it is different. And a male has more muscle fibers that can fire more in sync so we will be stronger. But now when you talk about a volume standpoint, there's also much more muscle damage that goes along with that movement. So, but
all right. Well, that's a lot of food for thought for sure, but hopefully that all made sense.
yeah, I said we wanted to keep it simple, but I'll get better at that whiteboard thing now that I know it exists. And I have this I found this little pin that I don't know where I got it from, but
but hopefully there was enough in there of lay person explaining that all that made sense. If not,
I think the gist of it,
I
think the gist of it is simple, which is don't confuse your muscles, still have a plan. And there's plenty of schemes out there that do kind of work. But again, you want some semblance of variety, because then you can do more, but you also want some semblance of structure, because you do need to be able to measure success, as well as your body needs that to be able to actually get better at stuff.
You need to be able to make it appropriately really difficult.
Appropriately really difficult. Yep.
All right.
All right.
I'm gonna go do that with some rows now, and we'll see y'all later.
I got yard work.